There are moments in a leader's life when the room becomes silent, not because people have nothing to say, but because truth has entered before anyone is ready to face it. I am Julius Malema, and I'm not telling this story to attack Paul Kagame. I am not telling it to make myself look cleaner, wiser, or more righteous than any other man who has carried the burden of politics. No. I tell this story because there are warnings that do not belong to one country, one party, or one president. They belong to every person who has ever been given power over the lives of others. At the beginning of February 2026, Africa was being pulled between three heavy pressures: unemployment, public debt, and a deep crisis of trust in leadership. In South Africa, millions of young people were still searching for work. Families were still trapped between hunger and political promises. Across the continent, ordinary people were asking whether leaders could still feel their pain or whether power had made them deaf. That was the atmosphere when I arrived in Kigali, Rwanda, for the 20th National Umushikirano Council at the Kigali Convention Center. Rwanda is a country the world often praises for discipline, recovery, and growth. Many people look at Kigali and see clean streets, order, and a nation that rose from terrible history with remarkable strength. I do not deny that. Any honest person must recognize the weight of Rwanda's story. But as I sat there, watching leaders speak about stability, development, and national progress, one question kept pressing against my spirit. Is development enough for a leader to be called righteous before God? Can a nation grow on paper while the soul of its people remains afraid, unheard, or forgotten? That night, I did not want an easy conversation. I wanted to ask the question many politicians avoid. If Jesus Christ stood before the leaders of the world today, would he praise us for our power or warn us for the responsibility we have neglected? I thought I had come to Kigali for a political dialogue, but when the door of that private room closed behind me, I realized this was no longer Malema speaking to Kagame. It was power standing before the warning of Jesus Christ. The red envelope in the security room that night, after the opening session at the Kigali Convention Center, I thought the most difficult words had already been spoken in public. I was wrong. It was the night of the 5th of February, 2026. The speeches were over. The cameras had been packed away. The polite applause had faded into the walls. Outside, Kigali looked calm, disciplined, and almost untouched by the storms that trouble so many nations. But inside that building, something was waiting for me. A Rwandan security officer approached me quietly. He did not look nervous. He did not look friendly either. He leaned close and said, "Sir, you are requested in a private room." I asked who had requested me. He did not answer. That silence was the first warning. I followed him through a corridor behind the main hall, away from the lights, away from the delegates, away from the language of diplomacy. The deeper we walked, the more I felt that this was no longer part of the official program. There were no journalists there, no advisors, no assistants whispering into phones, only the sound of our footsteps and the strange heaviness of a place where important things are said without witnesses. The officer opened a small door and stepped aside. Inside the room, there was a table, 2 chairs, and a single red envelope lying in the center. No name, no seal, no explanation. Only one sentence written across the front in black ink. To whom much is given, much will be required. I stood still. I knew those words. They were not the words of a campaign. They were not the words of a constitution. They were a warning from Scripture, a warning to every person who has been trusted with more than others. For a moment, I did not touch the envelope. Something in me knew that once I opened it, I would not be able to pretend anymore. Then I sat down, picked it up, and broke it open. Inside was a folded document. At first, I thought it was a security briefing, maybe a confidential note, maybe a political trap. But when I unfolded the paper, my chest tightened. It was a list, not a normal list of names and titles. It looked like a moral record written as if the world itself had been placed inside a courtroom. Across the top were 3 columns. Power, wealth, people left behind. Under those columns were names of leaders from Africa and beyond. Some were presidents, some were former presidents, some were men praised by the world as builders of nations, some were men condemned as failures, some were Western leaders who spoke of democracy while their systems profited from the weakness of poorer nations. Then I saw Paul Kagame's name. I did not react with surprise. I had expected the conversation that night to be about him. But then I saw Cyril Ramaphosa's name. Then I saw names from Europe, names from America, names from institutions that never stand for election, yet decide the fate of countries through debt, currency, war, and trade. And then my eyes dropped lower. I saw my own name, Julius Malema. It had been circled in red. That was the moment the room changed. Before that second, I still believed I had come to Kigali to challenge another man. I thought I had come to ask Paul Kagame whether power had become too comfortable in his hands. I thought I had come to speak as an accuser, maybe even as a witness for the poor. But when I saw my own name circled on that page, I felt something colder than fear. I felt exposure. Because the list did not ask whether I had ever held the office of president. It did not ask whether I had controlled a government. It did not ask whether the world called me powerful enough. It asked a deeper question. What have you done with the voice you were given? That question shook me. Many people think only presidents are judged for leadership. That is not true. A man with a microphone can mislead people. A man with a movement can awaken people or poison them. A man who speaks for the poor can still become addicted to applause. I looked again at the 3 columns. Power, wealth, people left behind. It was as if the paper was saying, do not point at another leader until you have allowed God to point at you. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to call it theater, manipulation, political drama. But I could not, because every name on that page carried the same silent accusation. Not that every leader was the same. Not that every leader had committed the same wrong, but that every leader had been given something, and every leader would one day answer for it. The most disturbing part was not the presence of famous names. It was the empty spaces beneath them, rows waiting to be filled, as if the list was not finished, as if history was still writing, as if more leaders would be added before morning. I placed the paper back on the table, but my hands did not feel steady. I thought about the young people in South Africa who wake up every day without work. I thought about mothers who bury hope quietly because they cannot afford to feed their children with promises. I thought about old people who have seen one generation of leaders after another speak about freedom while their grandchildren remain trapped. Then I looked at the red envelope again. That sentence was still staring at me. To whom much is given, much will be required. At that moment, I understood something I did not want to understand. I had come there to speak about Kagame's responsibility, but that envelope made it clear that God does not allow a man to stand outside the judgment he demands for others. I was not holding evidence against another leader. I was holding a mirror, and before I could decide whether to leave the room or tear the paper apart, the lights above me flickered once. Then the room went dark. The black screen that showed numbers that could speak. The room went dark so suddenly that I could not even see the red envelope on the table anymore. For a few seconds, there was nothing. No voice, no movement, no explanation, only darkness. Then a large black screen on the wall came alive. At first, it showed no image, only a thin white line like the pulse of a dying patient in a hospital bed. It moved slowly across the screen, rising and falling, as if the heart of the continent itself was being measured. Then the first image appeared. A group of children stood outside a broken school building. The walls were cracked, the windows were missing, their uniforms were old, but their eyes were awake. They were not crying. That was what made it worse. They looked like children who had already learned that crying changes nothing. The image changed. A hospital corridor appeared. People were sitting on the floor. Mothers held babies. Old men leaned against the wall. Nurses moved quickly. But there were too many bodies, too many needs, too many wounds for the system to carry. Then Johannesburg appeared. Then Kigali, then Kinshasa, then Lagos. Different cities, different flags, different governments, but the same question stood behind every face. Who is responsible for the people left behind? I wanted to look away, but the screen would not let me. White words appeared over the images. South Africa unemployment in the first quarter of 2026, 32.7%. The number stayed on the screen longer than normal. It did not feel like a statistic. It felt like an accusation. Then another line appeared. South African youth unemployment, ages 15 to 24, 60.9%. My throat tightened. I know those young people. I have spoken to them. I have seen them standing at street corners, outside government offices, outside closed factories, outside a future that keeps refusing to open the door. They are not lazy. Many of them are not hopeless by nature. They have simply been disappointed so many times that disappointment has become their daily bread. The screen changed again. This time, it showed a young man sitting on the edge of a bed in a small room. His certificate was beside him. His shoes were clean. His shirt was ironed, but his phone was silent. No interview, no call, no chance. Then a sentence appeared across his face. A nation does not collapse only when buildings fall. It collapses when its young people stop believing tomorrow belongs to them. I felt that sentence enter me like a blade. Then the screen showed something bigger. Not one city, not one country. A map of the world appeared with lines moving from poor nations toward rich financial centers. The lines looked like veins, but they were not carrying life. They were carrying debt, interest, dependency, and quiet humiliation. Then the next number appeared. External debt of developing countries in 2024, $11.7 trillion. $11.7 trillion. The number sat there like a mountain placed on the chest of the poor. I thought about classrooms that were never built because money had to leave the country. I thought about hospitals that never received medicine because budgets were swallowed before they reached the sick. I thought about roads, farms, water systems, electricity, and jobs that existed in speeches but never reached the people. And then the screen showed a table. Not a table of leaders, a table of choices. Education delayed, health care reduced, jobs postponed, food insecurity ignored, youth dignity sacrificed, public trust broken. Each phrase appeared slowly, one after another, until the screen became crowded with the hidden price of leadership failure. Then a voice came from the darkness. It was not loud. That made it more frightening. It sounded calm, almost tired, like a voice that had watched powerful men repeat the same mistakes for centuries. No leader fails in one day. I froze. The voice continued. They fail each time they call the pain of the people a statistic. The words entered the room and stayed there. I looked toward the door, but it remained closed. The voice spoke again. They fail each time they praise growth while the poor cannot afford bread. The screen changed to show a woman counting coins beside a small cooking pot. They fail each time they call silence peace. The image changed to a crowd standing behind barriers while leaders walked across a red carpet. They fail each time they speak of national pride while the youth bury their dreams alive. The young man with the certificate appeared again. This time he was not sitting. He was standing outside in the street, holding papers in his hand, surrounded by others just like him. Then the screen went black. For a moment I thought it was over. But then my own face appeared. Not from that night, from rallies, from interviews, from public speeches, from moments when I had spoken with fire and certainty. Then the screen split into two sides. On one side were the people cheering. On the other side were the people still waiting for change. That was when I understood the cruelty of that room. It was not designed to flatter anyone. It was not designed to protect anyone. It was designed to strip every leader, every speaker, every powerful voice, every revolutionary, every president, every institution, and every prophet of politics down to one question. After all your words, who is actually living better? I could feel sweat on my back, though the room was cold. The red envelope was still somewhere on the table, hidden in the darkness, but I could feel its presence like a witness. Then the screen showed Paul Kagame, not as a monster, not as a saint, as a man carrying a nation built from ashes, praised by many, questioned by many, feared by some, respected by others. His image stood beside the same three columns I had seen in the envelope: power, wealth, people left behind. Then my image appeared beside his. The same column stood under my name too. That was the moment the message became impossible to escape. This was not a trial of Kagame alone. This was not a trial of Rwanda alone. This was not even a trial of Africa alone. This was a trial of leadership itself. The voice came again. Do not ask only what a leader has built. Ask who paid the price for the building. The screen showed clean streets. Then it showed hungry homes. It showed conference halls. Then it showed crowded clinics. It showed flags. Then it showed unemployed youth standing in lines that seemed to have no end. The contrast was too sharp, too deliberate, too painful. It was as if the screen was asking whether development without compassion becomes a beautiful mask over a wounded face. I leaned forward and placed both hands on the table. For the first time that night, I felt something close to fear. Not fear of Kagame, not fear of Rwanda, not fear of politics. Fear that Jesus Christ might look at all of us who speak in the name of the people and ask one simple question: where are the people I trusted you to protect? The voice fell silent. The screen turned black again. Then one final sentence appeared in white letters: when leaders forget the poor, heaven remembers their names. I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. Then I heard something behind me, a lock turning, a handle moving. The door opened slowly, and the man who stepped into the room was not a security officer. It was not an advisor. It was Paul Kagame. The question that froze the whole room. Paul Kagame stepped into the room without haste. He did not look surprised by the darkness. He did not look confused by the black screen. He did not look like a man who had just walked into something strange. That disturbed me more than anger would have. A man who is shocked can be read. A man who is angry can be understood. But a man who enters a room of accusation with calm eyes makes you wonder how much he already knows. The door closed behind him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The screen behind me was still black. The red envelope was still on the table. My own name was still circled inside that paper, as if heaven had refused to let me hide behind another man's judgment. Kagame looked at the table, then at me. Mr. Malema, he said quietly, you look like a man who has seen more than he expected. I wanted to answer with confidence. I wanted to sound like the same man people hear at rallies, the man who does not tremble when he speaks. But the room had already taken something from me. It had taken the comfort of pointing fingers. So I stood up slowly. Mr. President, I said, if Jesus Christ walked into this room tonight, would he call us servants of the people or men who have become used to being served by them? The question did not echo loudly. It landed heavily. There are questions that do not need volume because they carry judgment inside them. Kagame did not blink. But the silence around us changed. It became thicker, as if even the walls were listening. He walked toward the table and looked at the envelope. He did not touch it. He only studied it for a moment, then raised his eyes back to me. Rwanda is not a country that survived by weakness, he said. We are a small nation. We have known horror. We have known the kind of collapse that destroys families, memory, trust, and the ground beneath people's feet. You cannot speak about Rwanda as if discipline is decoration. For us, discipline has been survival. I heard the weight in his voice, and I did not dismiss it. No honest African should speak lightly about Rwanda's pain. No leader should pretend that a nation can rise from blood, grief, and ruins by slogans alone. There are histories so heavy that anyone speaking about them must remove pride from his mouth first. So I answered carefully. I know Rwanda has carried suffering that no nation should carry, I said. I know a country that has passed through fire cannot be rebuilt by careless hands. But Mr. President, there is a difference between discipline that protects the people and discipline that makes the people afraid to speak the truth. For the first time, his face hardened, not with rage, with warning. That kind of warning powerful men do not need to announce. It arrives in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. You speak easily, he said. You come from a country where disorder is often mistaken for freedom. You speak of fear, but you know what chaos does to the poor. The poor do not survive chaos. They are the first to be crushed by it. His words struck me because there was truth in them. In South Africa, I have seen freedom used as a slogan while communities drown in crime, hunger, and broken promises. I have seen people speak beautifully about rights while children walk past sewage, unemployment, and despair. I have seen leaders hide behind democracy while ordinary people live without dignity. So I could not pretend his argument was empty, but I also could not let it become the final answer. I placed my hand on the Bible on the table. I do not remember putting it there. Maybe it had been there before me. Maybe someone had placed it there as part of the same strange design that brought me into that room. But in that moment, it was there. I opened it, not like a preacher trying to win an argument, but like a guilty man looking for a light strong enough to expose both sides. Jesus said, "The greatest among you must be your servant." I said, he did not say the greatest must be the most feared. He did not say the greatest must be the most praised. He did not say the greatest must be the one whose streets look clean while the hearts of the people remain locked. The air changed again. Kagame stepped closer. "Do you think leadership is simple?" he asked. "Do you think nations are protected by softness? Do you think enemies wait politely while leaders ask moral questions?" "No," I answered. "I think leadership is dangerous. That is why it must fear God." The words left my mouth before I could soften them. For a few seconds, even I was shocked by what I had said. Then the black screen behind us lit up again. This time it showed no numbers. Only one sentence. "Power without repentance becomes a throne built over graves." Neither of us spoke. The sentence stayed there like a verdict nobody had requested, but everybody understood. I looked at Kagame, and for a moment, I did not see only a president. I saw every leader I had ever challenged, every leader I had ever envied, every leader I had ever accused, every leader I had ever wanted to become stronger than. Then I saw myself among them. That was the terrible part. This room did not allow a man to stand outside the fire. Kagame turned toward the screen and read the sentence. When he looked back at me, his voice was lower. "You speak of repentance," he said, "but can you repent for a nation? Can a leader kneel while surrounded by wolves? Can a country survive if its leader lowers his guard before people who would destroy it?" I had no quick answer. That question was not small. It was the question every wounded nation asks. How do you protect people without controlling them too tightly? How do you keep peace without turning silence into a prison? How do you build order without making obedience the price of belonging? I looked at the red envelope again. Power. wealth, people left behind. Those three words had become a courtroom. And in that courtroom, neither Kagame nor I could escape. Mr. President, I said finally, I'm not asking whether a leader must be strong. I am asking whether that strength still knows how to kneel before God. That sentence froze the room. Not because it insulted him, because it included me. It included every man who has ever raised his voice before a crowd and confused applause with righteousness. It included presidents, opposition leaders, church leaders, business leaders, generals, bankers, judges, and anyone who can make decisions that change the lives of people they may never meet. Kagame looked at me for a long time. Then he did something I did not expect. He did not shout. He did not walk out. He did not call security. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. That frightened me more than anger. Because when a powerful man chooses to stay after a question like that, you know the real confrontation has only begun. He leaned forward and said, "Then answer your own question first, Malema." I felt the words enter my chest. He continued, "If Jesus Christ walked into this room, would he only question Rwanda? Would he only question Kagame? Or would he ask what you have done with the anger, the influence, and the voice that people have placed in your hands?" I could not speak. The screen went black again. The envelope remained between us. And for the first time that night, I understood that I had not been invited into that room to put Kagame on trial. I had been brought there so that both of us could discover that no leader is safe when the warning of Jesus Christ enters the room. Power is not a throne. It is a debt before the people. Kagame's question stayed in the room longer than his voice. Would he ask what you have done with the anger, the influence, and the voice that people have placed in your hands? I looked at him, and for a few seconds, I hated the fact that he had asked it. Not because it was unfair, but because it was too fair. It is easier to speak about another man's power than to examine your own. It is easier to challenge a president than to ask whether your own words have healed people or only made them clap. So I sat down opposite him. The red envelope was between us like a witness that refused to leave. I placed my hand on the table and said, maybe that is the first warning Jesus gives to leaders. Power is not a throne. Power is a debt. Kagame did not answer. So I continued. When people give a leader power, they are not giving him permission to become larger than them. They are giving him their hunger, their fear, their children, their future, and their trust. And one day, that leader must answer for what he did with all of it. The screen behind us came on again. This time it showed no frightening images, no children outside broken schools, no crowded hospitals, no unemployed youth. It showed polished conference halls, flags, podiums, leaders shaking hands, smiling faces. Then the images slowed down until every smile looked heavy. Across the screen appeared the words, "Africa does not lack speeches." I read them in silence. Then another sentence appeared, "Africa does not lack summits." Then another, "Africa does not lack slogans." Then finally, "Africa lacks leaders who tremble before the suffering of the poor." I felt that line enter the room like thunder without sound. I turned back to Kagame. "Mr. President," I said, "our continent has heard every beautiful phrase. Development, stability, sovereignty, transformation, reform, growth, unity. We have heard them all. But the question Jesus would ask is not whether the speech was powerful. The question is whether the poor lived better after the speech ended." Kagame's eyes remained steady. I could not tell whether he agreed or whether he was preparing to cut me open with his answer. So I pressed further. "Rwanda recorded strong growth. The world speaks about your country with admiration. They say Rwanda grew by 8.9% in 2024. They say it is disciplined. They say it is organized. They say it is a model of recovery." I paused. "But is growth alone enough? Does growth carry mercy? Does growth carry freedom? Does growth carry transparency? Does growth allow the weak to speak without fear? Does growth wipe the tears of a mother whose child still cannot find a future? The room became still again. That was the strange thing about that night. Every question seemed to awaken something hidden in the walls. The screen changed. It showed a scale. On one side, economic growth. On the other side, human dignity. The scale did not move. It simply waited. I said, a nation can build roads and still leave souls behind. A government can clean streets and still leave hearts dirty with fear. A leader can win praise abroad and still fail the unseen people at home. Kagame leaned back slightly. And who decides that? He asked. You, the West, the opposition, the media, those who do not carry the responsibility of keeping a country together? His question was sharp, and again it was not empty. Many leaders are judged by people who do not know the weight of the chair they occupy. Many critics speak as if nations are simple machines. Many outside voices pretend to care about human rights while ignoring the damage their own systems create. So I did not rush to answer. I looked at the Bible. Then I said, God decides, and God does not judge leadership by public relations. He judges it by truth. Kagame's face did not change, but his silence became heavier. I said, the world may applaud a leader because the numbers look good. Investors may applaud because the markets look stable. Foreign governments may applaud because their interests are protected. But heaven is not impressed by applause. Heaven listens for the cry of the person no report mentions. The black screen behind us showed faces again. Not famous faces. A farmer, a cleaner, a street vendor, a young graduate, a grandmother, a child in a classroom, a patient waiting outside a clinic. Each face appeared for only a moment, but together they became stronger than any crowd. Then the voice from the darkness returned. Do not measure leadership only by what rises. Measure it by who is lifted. I felt those words strike both of us because they were not aimed only at Rwanda. They were aimed at South Africa. They were aimed at every capital city in Africa. They were aimed at Washington, London, Paris, Brussels, Beijing, Moscow, and every room where powerful men speak about the poor without sitting among them. I said softly, a leader is not great because people fear him. A leader is not great because the world praises him. A leader is not great because buildings rise during his time. A leader is great only if the weakest person under his power can say, my life was not invisible to him. For the first time, Kagame looked away. Only for a second. But I saw it. And that second told me the question had reached him. Maybe not as defeat, maybe not as agreement, but as weight. I looked down at the red envelope again. The 3 columns were still in my mind. Power, wealth, people left behind. I realized those columns were not just accusations. They were a test. Power asked, what were you trusted with? Wealth asked, what did you protect? People left behind asked, who paid the price? That was the real warning. Not that power is evil. Power can build, power can protect, power can bring order out of ruin, power can defend a people from destruction. But power without accountability becomes a hunger that never says enough. Power without mercy becomes a machine. Power without repentance becomes a throne that looks strong on earth, but is already shaking before God. I looked at Kagame and said, tonight, I am not asking you to be weak. I am asking whether strength can still hear the poor. I am asking whether a nation can be disciplined without becoming deaf. I am asking whether leadership can be firm and still humble enough to kneel. He did not respond immediately. Then he said, and if a leader kneels, will the world spare his people? That question opened the next wound. Because behind every powerful leader, there is always a story of danger. Behind every hard decision, there is always a fear. Behind every defended throne, there is always a reason that sounds noble. And that was when I understood the next part of the night. Kagame was not going to accept a simple sermon. He was going to answer from the wound of a country that had bled, and I would have to listen. A nation that has bled cannot be led by weakness. Kagame looked at me for a long moment before he spoke again. This time his voice was not cold. It was controlled. But behind that control was something older than politics. Mr. Malema, he said, you speak of mercy, humility, and accountability. These are good words, but good words do not protect a nation when men with weapons decide that your people should die. The room became silent. Not ordinary silence. The kind of silence that comes when history enters and nobody knows where to place their eyes. He continued, you speak of freedom. But what is freedom to a mother who has watched her children dragged from their home? What is freedom to a country that has seen neighbors turn against neighbors? What is freedom if the state collapses and the weakest people are left for wolves? I did not interrupt him. For once, I knew my fire would not help. There are moments when a man must stop preparing his answer and simply listen. Kagame leaned forward, his hands still on the table. Rwanda did not come from comfort, he said. We did not inherit peace like a gift. We had to rebuild trust from ashes. We had to build institutions where there had been fear. We had to teach people to live together after the worst had already happened. The black screen behind us came alive again. This time, there were no statistics. Only one sentence. A wounded nation does not fear criticism first. It fears returning to the wound. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. I understood then that Kagame was not only defending power, he was defending memory. And memory is dangerous when it becomes both a warning and a shield. He looked at the sentence, then back at me. You ask whether discipline can become fear, he said. I ask whether disorder can become death. You ask whether people can speak freely. I ask whether careless speech can reopen graves. You ask whether a leader kneels before God. I ask whether a leader can protect his people if he kneels while enemies are standing. His words were heavy, and I could not pretend they were meaningless. Many people who have never governed speak as if leadership is only a moral performance. They imagine that a leader wakes up each morning choosing between good and evil, like a simple man choosing between two roads. But leadership is often more terrible than that. Sometimes every road carries blood. Sometimes every decision leaves someone wounded. Sometimes the leader who opens too much space fears chaos, and the leader who closes too much space creates fear. I looked at Kagame and said, I hear you. He did not soften. You hear me, he said, but do you understand? A nation that has bled cannot be led by weakness. Those words stayed in the air. A nation that has bled cannot be led by weakness. I repeated them in my mind because I knew many people would agree with him. Many would say, this is the truth Africa must learn. Many would say, strong nations need strong hands. Many would say, peace must be protected even when the methods are uncomfortable. And part of me understood that. South Africa also knows what happens when promises are not enough. We know what happens when crime enters communities like a second government. We know what happens when leaders talk but do not act. We know what happens when the poor are told to be patient while their homes become battlefields of hunger, drugs, unemployment, and despair. So I did not mock strength. I did not condemn order. I did not pretend that weakness is holy. Instead, I asked the only question that still burned inside me. Mr. President, I said, what happens when the hand that protects the people becomes the hand they fear? He did not answer immediately. The screen turned black again, as if even the hidden voice wanted to hear him. I continued. I'm not saying a country does not need order. I'm not saying a leader must allow chaos to swallow the poor. I'm not saying history does not matter. I am asking whether pain gives a leader permanent permission to avoid examination. Kagame's eyes narrowed slightly. I knew I was touching something dangerous, but the question had to be asked. Every leader has a story, I said. Every leader has a reason. Every leader can point to a crisis, an enemy, a wound, a war, a threat, or a betrayal. And many times those reasons are real. But if a noble reason is never questioned, it can become a holy cover for dangerous power. The red envelope sat between us. I looked at it again. Power, wealth, people left behind. Then I said, that is why Jesus frightens powerful men. He does not only judge evil motives, he also questions noble motives when they begin to crush the people they claim to protect. Kagame's expression changed. It was not anger. It was recognition. Not agreement, but recognition that the question had reached the deeper place. He said, you speak as if Jesus would not understand what it means to protect a people. No, I replied. I speak because Jesus understood suffering better than any ruler. He knew betrayal. He knew violence. He knew occupation. He knew the cruelty of power. But he still warned that those who lead must become servants, not masters. For the first time, Kagame looked down at the Bible on the table. The room felt smaller. I said, a strong leader may protect borders, but a servant leader protects dignity. A strong leader may silence enemies, but a servant leader listens even when truth is uncomfortable. A strong leader may build a nation, but a servant leader asks whether the people can breathe inside what he has built. Kagame lifted his eyes. And if the people use that breath to destroy one another, he asked. That question cut through me because I had no easy answer. No serious person does. Freedom without responsibility can become poison. Order without humility can become prison. Leadership lives between those two dangers, and the poor suffer whenever leaders fail to balance them. I said, then the leader must teach, protect, and correct, but he must never confuse himself with God. The room went still. That sentence did not feel like something I had planned to say. It felt like something forced out of me by the weight of the night. Kagame sat back slowly. You think African leaders confuse themselves with God? He asked. I looked at him. I think all leaders are tempted to. I said, African leaders, Western leaders, opposition leaders, religious leaders, business leaders, even men like me, the moment people clap long enough, a man can begin to believe his voice is the voice of destiny. The black screen lit up again. One sentence appeared. Every throne whispers, you are necessary. Another sentence followed. Every warning from God answers, you are accountable. I felt my own chest tighten because that was not only for Kagame. It was for me. I had stood before crowds. I had heard my name shouted. I had felt the heat of public love and public anger. I knew how easy it was for a man to think he alone sees clearly. That is the hidden danger of leadership. Not only corruption, not only money, not only luxury. The deeper danger is when a leader begins to believe that his fear, his anger, his history, and his vision are beyond correction. Kagame looked at me and said, so what do you want from me, Malema? A confession? An apology? A performance for your conscience? I shook my head. No, I said. I want the same thing this room is asking from me. He waited. I said, I want us to admit that strength without accountability can become another form of violence. The words stayed between us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Kagame said something that changed the whole direction of the night. Then stop speaking as if you came here only to question me. Look at the envelope again. I looked down. The red circle around my own name seemed darker than before. Kagame's voice became quieter. Maybe your God brought you here not because Kagame needed a sermon. He paused. Maybe he brought you here because Malema needed a mirror. I did not answer because in that moment I knew he was right. I was dragged into my own trial. For a long time, I could not look away from the red circle around my own name. Julius Malema. It was strange how a name can look different when it is written on a page of judgment. I had heard my name shouted by crowds. I had heard it praised, mocked, defended, condemned, and repeated on television screens. But in that room, my name did not sound like politics. It sounded like evidence. Kagame did not speak. He did not need to. The envelope had already done what no argument could do. It had removed the safety of accusation from my hands. I leaned back in my chair and felt something inside me resisting the truth. Every political man knows that resistance. It is the voice that says, not me. It is the voice that says, I am different. It is the voice that says, my anger is righteous, my mistakes are understandable, my enemies are worse, my people need my fire. But the warning of Jesus does not bow to those excuses. It cuts through all of them. I looked at Kagame and said, maybe you are right. The words tasted bitter, not because I hated truth, but because truth is always heavier when it turns toward you. I am also a politician, I said. I have also spoken with anger. I have also used words that made people tremble. I have also stood before crowds and felt the danger of being loved too loudly. Kagame watched me carefully. The black screen behind us came on again. This time it showed no African city, no hospital, no broken school, no map of death. It showed a crowd, a political crowd, faces lifted toward a stage, hands raised, mouths open, people shouting the name of a leader as if one man could carry all their hunger, all their anger, and all their disappointment. Then the screen showed the same crowd leaving afterward. The lights were gone. The stage was empty. The slogans had ended. But the people were still poor. That image hurt more than I expected. Because every leader must face the question nobody wants to ask after the rally ends. Did we change their lives? Or did we only give them a moment to feel powerful? I lowered my eyes. In South Africa, I said, the pain is not theoretical. It has names, it has faces. It lives in townships, in villages, in families where a young person wakes up with no work, no direction, and no reason to trust another promise. The screen showed a young woman standing outside a closed factory gate. Then a father sitting silently at a kitchen table. Then a grandmother counting coins. Then a group of young men waiting on a street corner, not because they are lazy, but because the country has not opened a door for them. I continued. We speak about liberation, we speak about justice, we speak about the people, but the people cannot eat speeches, they cannot pay rent with slogans, they cannot raise children on applause. The room felt colder. Kagame remained still, but I could feel that he understood the weight of what I was saying. Maybe not because he agreed with my politics, maybe not because he trusted my words, but because every leader knows the difference between being cheered and being accountable. I touched the Bible on the table. Do I have the right to use scripture to question another man if I do not allow scripture to question me? I asked. The question did not need an answer. It had already answered itself. I thought about the opposition in South Africa. I thought about how easy it is to blame only those in power, as if those outside the highest office carry no burden at all. But a leader does not need to sit in the president's chair to influence a nation. A voice can heal or wound. A movement can awaken or mislead. Anger can expose injustice, but it can also become a fire that burns more than it builds. That was the part I did not want to face. I had come to Kigali prepared to speak about responsibility, but I had imagined responsibility as something placed mainly on the shoulders of presidents. That night, I understood it is also placed on anyone who moves the hearts of people. The voice from the darkness returned. Every man who speaks for the wounded must answer for what his words produce. I closed my eyes for a moment. I saw the poor. I saw the young. I saw people who do not care about political theories because they are fighting for bread, school fees, medicine, safety, and dignity. Then I heard another sentence in my spirit. If your anger does not lead people toward life, it may only be another chain. I opened my eyes. Kagame was still looking at me. I said, I came here to ask whether you feared the warning of Jesus, but now I must ask myself the same question. My voice became lower. Malema, do you fear it? The room did not answer, but my heart did. I feared it. Not in the way a man fears losing an election. Not in the way a man fears a headline. Not in the way a man fears an enemy. I feared it the way the soul fears standing naked before truth. Because when Jesus warns leaders, he does not only ask what they built, he asks who they ignored. He does not only ask what they opposed, he asks what they became while opposing it. He does not only ask whether they fought for the poor, he asks whether the poor were lifted, loved, protected, and treated as children of God. I looked again at the document from the red envelope. My name was still circled, but now I understood. The circle was not only an accusation, it was an invitation. An invitation to repent before being exposed. An invitation to examine myself before demanding examination from another man. An invitation to stop using the people as a symbol and start asking whether their lives had truly become better because of my voice. I said to Kagame, maybe no leader should speak after tonight unless he first asks himself who has been left behind by his ambition. Kagame leaned forward slightly. And will you ask that? He said. I looked at him. Yes, I answered. But I will not pretend it is easy. The screen behind us showed one final sentence. The hardest courtroom is the one where a man can no longer blame only his enemies. I sat there in silence. For the first time that night, the confrontation between Kagame and me felt smaller than the confrontation happening inside me. I had entered the room ready to challenge power. But now the warning had turned its face toward me. And I knew that if Jesus Christ was truly present in that moment, he was not asking which one of us could win the debate. He was asking which one of us was still willing to be corrected. Jesus' warning was not only for Africa. For a while, neither Kagame nor I spoke. The room was quiet, but it was not peaceful. There is a silence that heals, and there is a silence that exposes. This was the second kind. It sat between us like a third person, forcing both of us to listen to things we did not want to hear. I looked at the black screen again. This time, it did not show Rwanda. It did not show South Africa. It showed the world. Lines moved across oceans. Some lines carried money, some carried weapons, some carried minerals, some carried grain, some carried debt. They moved from the poorest places on earth towards cities where decisions are made by people who will never meet the children affected by those decisions. Then the voice returned. Do not make the mistake of thinking this warning belongs only to Africa. The words were calm, but they struck the room like a bell. I understood immediately. It would be too easy to sit in Kigali and speak only about African presidents. It would be too easy to speak only about Kagame, Ramaphosa, Malema, or any other leader whose face the people know. But power does not always wear a national flag. Sometimes power wears a suit in a financial institution. Sometimes it sits behind a trade agreement. Sometimes it speaks the language of peace while selling the tools of war. I looked at Kagame and said, maybe this is bigger than both of us. He did not answer. The screen showed leaders shaking hands in bright rooms, signing documents, smiling for cameras, speaking about cooperation, stability, democracy, and development. Then the image changed. A child sat in a classroom without enough books. A woman waited in a clinic without medicine. A farmer stood before dry land. A young man crossed a border because his own country had become too small for his hope. Then the screen showed the number again. The external debt of developing countries in 2024 had reached $11.7 trillion. $11.7 trillion. I had seen that number before, but now it felt different. It no longer looked like economics. It looked like a chain. I said, when a poor country borrows, the people often pay. They pay through schools that are delayed. They pay through hospitals that are underfunded. They pay through jobs that never arrive. They pay through the dignity of a generation, forced to inherit bills they did not create. Kagame looked at the screen. For once, his face revealed nothing. But I could feel that he understood the danger of the question. Because this was no longer about whether one African leader was strong or weak. This was about a world where weak countries are told to be disciplined by the same systems that help make them weak. I said, when a poor leader is corrupt, the people suffer. That is true. We must say it plainly. But when the global system is unjust, whole generations are nailed to a cross of debt, dependency, and controlled opportunity. The room seemed to tighten around those words. The screen went black. Then white letters appeared. The powerful do not become innocent because their violence is legal. I read the sentence twice. It frightened me because it was true in ways many people do not want to admit. Some leaders destroy their people with corruption. Some destroy them with fear. Some destroy them with war. But others destroy them with contracts, interest rates, sanctions, weapons deals, unfair trade, and polite speeches that hide cruel outcomes. Not every wound is made by a gun. Some wounds are signed into existence. I turned back to Kagame. Jesus warned those who had much. I said, he did not only warn the poor man who steals bread. He warned the rich man who ignores Lazarus at the gate. He warned the religious man who loves public honor but neglects mercy. He warned those who carry influence and pretend they do not see the people crushed beneath it. Kagame leaned back slowly. And do you think the world will listen to that? He asked. I almost laughed, but nothing about the room allowed laughter. No, I said. The world rarely listens before it is forced to. The screen showed a boardroom, then a refugee camp, a military aircraft, then a destroyed village, a luxury dinner, then a child drinking dirty water. Each image appeared for only a moment, but the meaning was clear. The world is very good at separating comfort from consequence. The people who make decisions often sleep far away from the people who bleed because of them. I said, that is why the warning of Jesus is so dangerous. It crosses borders. It ignores titles. It does not stop at presidential palaces. It enters banks, parliaments, churches, military rooms, private clubs, and every closed meeting where human life is discussed like a number. The red envelope on the table seemed even brighter now. Power, wealth, people left behind. Those three columns were no longer only about presidents. They were about the whole architecture of the world. I thought of leaders who speak about peace while selling weapons. I thought of governments that preach democracy while protecting dictators when it benefits them. I thought of institutions that demand sacrifice from the poor but never ask the powerful to bleed. I thought of churches that bless authority without questioning whether authority has served the weak. Then I thought of myself again. Because even when we speak against global injustice, we can still become proud. Even the language of justice can become a costume if it does not produce mercy. Even the anger of the oppressed can become dangerous when it forgets the humanity of others. That night I realized Jesus' warning was not a weapon I could simply aim at my enemies. It was a fire that first had to pass through my own hands. The voice spoke again. More power means less excuse. I closed my eyes for a moment. That sentence was simple enough for a child to understand, but strong enough to shake every throne on earth. More power means less excuse. More money means less excuse. More influence means less excuse. More knowledge means less excuse. More opportunity means less excuse. That is what many leaders hate about the gospel. It does not allow the powerful to hide behind complexity forever. Yes, the world is complex. Yes, nations are difficult to govern. Yes, security matters. Yes, history matters. Yes, economics is not simple. But Jesus still asks, where is the hungry person? Where is the prisoner? Where is the sick? Where is the stranger? Where is the child? Where is the one you left behind while you defended your own greatness? I opened my eyes and looked at Kagame. I do not believe Jesus would only warn Africa, I said. He would warn Africa, yes, but he would also warn America. He would warn Europe. He would warn the banks. He would warn the arms dealers. He would warn the churches that became comfortable beside power. He would warn every leader who speaks of order while ignoring justice. Kagame was silent. Then he said, and who will deliver this warning? I looked at the envelope, then at the Bible, then back at him. Maybe anyone who has first allowed the warning to judge himself, I said. The screen behind us showed one final image. A long table, empty chairs, no flags, no names, only places waiting to be filled. Then the sentence appeared. One day, every leader will sit where applause cannot follow. I felt the full weight of that line, because applause can follow a man into stadiums. It can follow him into elections. It can follow him into history books written by those who admired him, but applause cannot follow him before God. Only truth can stand there. And that truth does not ask how loudly people cheered. It asks who was forgotten while they cheered. That was when I realized the warning of Jesus did not follow borders. It did not need a visa. It did not recognize diplomatic immunity. It moved straight into every room where power sits comfortably while the poor wait outside. And in that small room in Kigali, I understood that no leader on earth was beyond its reach. The radical accountability covenant. I looked at the empty chairs on the screen and felt as if the whole world had been summoned but had not yet arrived. Kagame remained silent. I could not tell whether he was thinking about Rwanda, about Africa, about the world, or about the same question that was now burning inside me. What does a leader do when he realizes that history may applaud him, but heaven may still question him? The black screen faded. Only the red envelope remained between us. I reached for the paper again and turned it over. On the back, there was writing I had not noticed before. It was not long. It was not complicated. It said, write what power must answer before it asks to be trusted again. I read the sentence twice. Then I looked at Kagame. Maybe this is why we are here, I said. He said nothing. So I continued. Not to decide who wins between Malema and Kagame. Not to decide which country is better. Not to perform morality in front of invisible witnesses. Maybe we are here because leadership itself must be forced to answer before the poor lose all faith in it. I pulled a pen from my jacket. For a moment, I hesitated because writing something down makes it dangerous. Spoken words can escape. Written words remain. I placed the paper flat on the table and wrote the first line. A leader must not measure success only by what rises in the economy, but by who rises among the poor. Kagame watched my hand move across the page. His face was unreadable. I said, growth is not enough if the weak remain invisible. A leader should not only announce numbers, he must be able to stand before the poorest family in his nation and explain what changed in their life. I wrote another line. Every policy must answer one question. What does it do for the weakest person? The room felt heavier as the words appeared. I thought of how governments love complicated language. They speak of frameworks, strategies, reforms, fiscal discipline, investment climates, and national visions. But the poor do not live inside policy language. They live inside rent, school fees, medicine, food, safety, and work. So I said, if a policy cannot answer the cry of the weak, it may still be intelligent, but it is not righteous. Kagame leaned forward slightly. And who will define the weak? He asked. The people who are easiest to ignore, I answered. The unemployed youth, the old woman waiting for medicine, the child in a broken school, the farmer without support, the worker without dignity, the citizen who fears both criminals and officials, the person whose suffering never reaches a speech. The screen came alive again. This time, it showed no images. Only the words I had written, appearing larger behind us, as if the room itself was turning my handwriting into a public record. Then I wrote the third line, African leaders must speak about peace in the region with truth, not slogans. Kagame's eyes sharpened. He knew where that line was going. I said, the tensions around the Democratic Republic of Congo cannot be solved by proud statements alone. No African leader should speak of sovereignty while ignoring the human cost of instability. No one should turn the suffering of civilians into a chessboard for influence, mineral security, or reputation. The air tightened. This was dangerous ground, but the whole night had been dangerous. I continued, Africa cannot keep burying its children while leaders exchange accusations. If there is conflict, let there be truth. If there are interests, let them be named. If there are wounds, let them be treated before they become another generation's inheritance. Kagame did not interrupt me. That made the room feel even more serious. I wrote the fourth line, youth, work, and human dignity must come before political image. As soon as I wrote it, I thought of South Africa. I thought of every young person who has been asked to wait while leaders protect their positions. I thought of young people across Africa who are told they are the future while the present shuts every door in their faces. I said, a government that protects its image more than its youth is preparing a crisis it will later pretend not to understand. The sentence felt harsh, but it felt true. The screen repeated it in white letters. A government that protects its image more than its youth is preparing a crisis. Kagame stared at the screen. I could feel the weight of the sentence pressing against both of us. Because no country escapes that warning. Not Rwanda, not South Africa, not America, not any nation where leaders speak of tomorrow while young people are losing faith today. Then I wrote the final line, every leader must have a day of examination before the people, not to deliver a speech, but to answer real questions. Kagame's expression changed. This time I saw something close to surprise. Before the people, he asked. Yes, I said. Not before cameras arranged to protect him, not before loyal voices chosen to praise him, before citizens who can ask what hurts, before workers, mothers, youth, elders, teachers, nurses, farmers, and the forgotten. A day when the leader does not perform power but submits it to truth. He sat back. That can become theater, he said. Yes, I answered. Everything can become theater. Speeches can become theater. Elections can become theater. Democracy can become theater. Even religion can become theater. But the answer to false accountability is not no accountability. The answer is deeper accountability. The room went silent again. I looked at the page. It was no longer just a note. It was becoming a covenant, not a legal document, not a treaty, not a press statement. A symbolic covenant that said power must stop hiding behind its own language. I wrote the title at the top, Radical Accountability Covenant. The words looked strange on the paper, too simple for politics, too dangerous for comfort. I pushed the paper toward Kagame. I am not asking you to sign this as a performance, I said. I am not asking you to pretend that one signature can heal a continent. I am asking whether leaders can admit that power without examination becomes dangerous, even when it begins with good intentions. Kagame looked at the paper. He did not pick up the pen. He read each line slowly. The room seemed to hold his breath. For a moment, I imagined what would happen if such a covenant became real, not as a slogan, not as another summit declaration, but as a standard, a burden, a mirror placed before every leader who speaks of the people while living far above their pain. Then Kagame lifted his eyes. Malema, he said, these words are heavy. I know, I answered. They are easy to write at night in a private room, he said. Harder to live in daylight before people will test you, insult you, misunderstand you, and still demand answers. I know, I said again. Then he pushed the paper back toward me. For one moment, I thought he was rejecting it. But he did not. He placed the pen on top of the page and looked directly at me. Before I sign anything, he said, answer me this. His voice became lower. Will you sign it with your mouth or with your life? The question struck me harder than any accusation because I had expected resistance. I had expected defense. I had expected him to say Rwanda would not be lectured. I had expected him to remind me again of history, danger, enemies, and survival. But this was different. He was not asking whether my words were strong. He was asking whether my life could survive them. That is the question every leader fears. Not can you speak. Not can you accuse. Not can you inspire. But can you live under the same truth you demand from others? I looked down at the covenant. The letters seemed to move before my eyes. A leader must not measure success only by what rises in the economy, but by who rises among the poor. Every policy must answer one question. What does it do for the weakest person? African leaders must speak about peace in the region with truth, not slogans. Youth, work, and human dignity must come before political image. Every leader must have a day of examination before the people, not to deliver a speech, but to answer real questions. I wanted to say yes quickly. But quick answers are often how politicians escape the weight of real questions. So I stayed silent. Longer than I wanted. Longer than Kagame expected. Longer than any speech I had ever given. The black screen behind us lit up one final time. It showed only one sentence. The covenant is not signed when ink touches paper. It is signed when pride begins to die. I stared at those words. And in that moment, I understood why the night had become so unbearable. The red envelope had not come to expose Kagame alone. The black screen had not come to frighten me with numbers alone. The Bible on the table had not come to decorate a political argument. Everything in that room was pushing us toward the same terrible truth. A leader who cannot be corrected becomes a danger, even when he claims to love his people. I looked at Kagame, then I looked at the pen, and for the first time that night, I was not sure whether I was brave enough to sign what I had written. The debate was not over. I did not sign the covenant immediately. That may disappoint some people. Maybe they expected me to take the pen, write my name with confidence, look Kagame in the eye, and declare that from that night forward, everything would change. But real accountability does not arrive like theater. It does not always come with a dramatic signature. Sometimes it begins with a silence so deep that a man finally hears the sound of his own pride breaking. I looked at the pen on the table. Then I looked at Kagame. He was not smiling. He was not celebrating. He was not trying to defeat me. In that strange room, he looked less like a president and more like a man who understood that power can protect you from many enemies, but it cannot protect you from truth. The black screen had gone dark. The voice had stopped. The red envelope was still open. The Bible was still on the table. And the covenant sat between us, unsigned, unfinished, and heavier than any agreement I had ever seen. Kagame stood first. For a moment, I thought he would leave without saying anything. But before he reached the door, he turned back. Malema, he said, the world has many men who know how to accuse. I said nothing. He continued, it has fewer men who can survive being examined. Then he opened the door and walked out. I remained there alone. No applause followed him. No camera captured the moment. No journalist asked who had won. That was when I realized the whole idea of winning had become useless. This was not Malema defeating Kagame. This was not Kagame silencing Malema. This was not Rwanda against South Africa. This was not one leader being exposed while another stood clean. The real debate was larger than both of us. It was whether any leader anywhere in the world could still stand before the people and before God without hiding behind speeches, titles, flags, history, or excuses. Near dawn on the 6th of February, 2026, I walked out of the Kigali Convention Center. The city was quiet. Kigali looked clean, orderly, and peaceful. The streets carried a discipline many countries would admire. The lights were soft. The morning had not fully arrived. For a brief moment, the city looked like a place where nothing was wrong. But inside me, nothing was settled. That is the danger of a true warning. It does not leave when the meeting ends. It follows you into the morning. It sits beside you in the car. It enters your thoughts when the world becomes quiet. It asks the same question again and again until you stop pretending you did not hear it. As I looked at Kigali, I thought about Rwanda's story. I thought about South Africa's pain. I thought about Africa's young people. I thought about leaders across the world who speak of peace while ordinary families carry the cost of their decisions. I thought about the poor, not as a slogan, not as a crowd, not as a line in a speech, as people, people with names, people with children, people with prayers, people with bodies that become tired from waiting. I also thought about the red envelope. I do not know who placed it there. I do not know whether it was a political trap, a symbolic test, or something stranger than I can explain. But I know what it did. It forced me to understand that the warning of Jesus Christ does not begin with the leaders we dislike. It begins with the responsibility we refuse to examine in ourselves. I do not know what Paul Kagame thought after that night. I do not know whether he dismissed the conversation, carried it quietly, or buried it beneath the duties of power. But I know what I carried. I carried the question, when Jesus warns leaders, does he begin with their thrones? No. He begins with the people they forgot while sitting on them. And if one day that list is opened before the whole world, the question will no longer be who had the highest office, who gave the strongest speeches, or who received the loudest applause. The question will be much more frightening. Who can still stand before the warning of Jesus Christ without being exposed by the people they left behind? After that conversation, I thought deeply about what I had said, what Kagame had said, and what the world is facing today. I realized that we may come from different nations, carry different histories, speak different languages, and hold different political beliefs, but deep inside, ordinary people are searching for the same things: dignity, justice, truth, hope. For many years, I have watched systems of power rise and fall. I have heard great promises that never reached the homes of the poor. I have seen leaders speak about strength while their people lived with fear, hunger, and disappointment. And I have learned that no nation can truly be strong while its people are trapped in poverty, silence, and injustice. Real change does not begin inside powerful buildings. It does not begin with loud speeches or beautiful slogans. It begins when human beings dare to live with conscience. It begins when we stand for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. It begins when we speak for those whose voices have been ignored for too long. I still believe future generations can build a better world than the one we have today. A world where people are respected for their value, not their status. A world where unity is stronger than division. A world where compassion is stronger than greed. The road ahead will not be easy, but I believe people who stand together, protect their dignity, and fight for truth can still change the destiny of their nations. Because hope does not belong to those who wait for miracles. Hope belongs to those who refuse to stop building a better future. And if this story made you think about leadership, justice, and the warning of Jesus Christ, leave a word of encouragement below and keep walking with us as we spread hope to more people.